Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to NARC's fifth webinar on the ways that regions are responding to the COVID-19 epidemic. I hope you're all feeling healthy, safe, and well wherever you're listening in from, and thanks for joining us. So my name is Amanda Linehan, and I am the Communications Director of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is in the Boston region. And I'm also co-chair of NARC's Communications and Government Affairs Group. I, along with my co-chair, Anna Devers from the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, are going to serve as today's moderators. Anna, I'll turn it over to you for some further introductions.
Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by speakers from 4 regions who will share some of the communications work they are engaging in to help battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us are Rick Guerrero, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Houston-Galveston Area Council, Miguel Segura, External Affairs Coordinator at the Alamo Area Council of Governments, Elise Turner, Communications Manager at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and Trevor Layton, Communications Specialist at the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. These speakers will touch on the internal communication efforts that they have undertaken to support the transition to telework and remote operations. They will also share some of the external communication projects that they've developed to help their member communities respond. We will also hear about some of the challenges that these organizations are facing amidst the continued uncertainty. And lastly, we will hold some time at the end of the webinar for participants to ask questions. And with that, I'll turn it back to Amanda.
Great, thank you, Anna. Could I have my first slide, please? All right, that's where Boston is. I guess go to my next slide so you can all have my contact information up while I introduce myself. So as I said, my name's Amanda Linehan. I'm head of communications at MAPC in Boston. We are about 115 people. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I'm gonna assume yes, unless I hear from Eli that something's wrong. I might have just got some feedback from someone else there. So as I was saying, MAPC has about 115 people. We serve a region that has almost 4 million residents. I've given you our homepage there, mapc.org, as well as our Twitter handle, since that's where we've been pushing most of our COVID information out, and you can feel free to go check that afterwards, and also reach out to me if you want any more information about any of the external communications that we've put out. Next slide. So in getting ready for COVID, I think a combination of Boston being home to so many universities and international students, as well as kind of the hub of just medicine and biotech for the country, we had a sense pretty early on how bad things could get. And so we started planning in late February to pull together an internal team to monitor what was happening with the developments of COVID-19. And by early March, we were meeting a couple times a week with this cross-departmental team, which basically had admin, HR, some people from our Homeland Security and emergency management staff, just folks that had a good cross-cutting view of the agencies. And we started to inventory really what needs we might have if we had to play out a series of scenarios where either the full agency had to go to remote work full-time, or if someone in the agency or someone that they took care of, got sick and we had to partially shut down a department or a line of work. We designated one person from that crisis response team to send daily email updates to the entire agency on behalf of leadership. One of the first things that they undertook, again, this is all kind of in the first week of March, was surveying what technology needs staff had, both in terms of what kind of hardware and software they had at home, also the speed of their internet, how much space they might have, how many other household members they might have to share a telework space with. And then we were able to start planning ahead so that when our governor declared a state of emergency in mid-March, we were very quickly able to pivot to 100% remote work. And knowing that most people had the accommodations made that they needed. Some of the key tools that we've been using to communicate are Slack, which we already used as an agency, and I do have a good model for how to deploy that in a public agency. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to connect offline to how we did that and stay compliant with public records laws. So we use that for chats and for video calls. We're also piloting the use of Zoom, and then we already used WebEx and Microsoft Teams. And then the first external communication step that we took was canceling all agency meetings and events from March through May. The key message that we put out there is that we are not closing. We are still here doing our work. We're just doing it from disparate places at our homes across the region, and we're here to be a resource for whatever our municipal partners need. I'll show you a snapshot of our homepage where we posted our statement, and then we set a press protocol that all calls, media calls already go to me as the communications director, but we stepped it up one more level and said that any external communication coming out of the agency also had to go through me in partnership with our executive director, just to make sure that nobody was getting tone deaf or I think people were really eager to let their partners know that we wanted to continue work, and in some cases it wasn't an appropriate phrasing or timing to do that. The other key thing that we did was our government affairs staff went very quickly into a mode of convening daily conference calls with the mayors in our region. And then we very rapidly expanded that to town managers and then mayors outside our region in the interest of sharing compiled resources. So we set up a Google Drive that has a lot of really useful files that I'd be happy to share with all of you. And it's just one-stop shopping, things around emergency preparedness, food access, decision making around closing schools, public health, you name it. We've tried to put it all into one place. And then the communications team under my supervision designed a social media toolkit that we also gave out to cities and towns, because what we really found was that they knew they wanted to communicate visually, and they knew that social media was going to be the fastest way to communicate during this crisis, but they just didn't have the capacity to create content. And so we've been doing that for them so that they can focus on not just the emergency needs locally, but shifting in many cases for the first time ever for municipal staff to work from home. That's not a practice that most of our cities and towns have, and so it was a really uphill battle for them. Finally, right now, what we're moving into on the external side is empowering our project managers to reach out to their partners, externally, whether that's a city, whether it's a grant maker, and we've asked them to actually grade their projects on a scale of 1 to 5, in a range of basically how feasible it is to continue or adapt it to remote work, or if it's something that just we have to put the pause button on and reallocate those resources elsewhere. So to support that, our community engagement team is rolling out a list of recommended tools that people can use for virtual meetings. To take one example, we subscribe to a survey product called Qualtrics, and in that you can do like a virtual town hall basically, and we hosted a webinar internally so that our staff could learn how to do that. I think it's something that I could share with folks on this group if anyone's interested, but that's an example of something where we're trying to make the most of a tool and see if we can deploy it for a virtual meeting or move any of our work digital, especially when it comes to engaging the public. Next slide. So here's an example of, if you go to our homepage, you will be very quickly rerouted to this COVID-19 resource page. We've basically been flowing all of our updates as they've gone out to the public. We've been updating them under that statement section. And then if you do go visit this at mapc.org and you scroll down, you'll see that we've listed point people on staff for different things that municipalities might need help with, whether it's, transportation planning or emergency or public health planning, or, a new thing that we're starting to get a lot of questions about, because a lot of cities and towns have closed down their parks and playgrounds. We're being asked if we can help come up with other alternative ways of getting people outdoors, whether that's reactivating trails that people haven't really used in a long time, or doing tactical urbanism projects to make some streets closed off to traffic, and then safely making them places that people can congregate within the confines of social distancing protocol. Next slide. So here's just an example of a social media template that we provided to municipalities. We did about a dozen of these, and they're just, kind of quick hits at the critical information that everybody's wanting to share in a really visual way, and making it so that it's not tied necessarily to our brand or our logo, but is, really visually appealing and something that any city or town or project partner could use on their social media profiles. Next slide. And just really quickly, I think we really got a good handle on what we wanted to do externally, and now the rubber is meeting the road when it comes time to the internal challenges. We're really having a lot of meetings and not a lot of decisions coming out of them in terms of how do we keep one another up to date cross-departmentally? How do we adapt our internal staff meetings? We used to get together once a month for 2 hours. that didn't feel really effective when we tried it online this week. We're also hearing a lot from staff that they have caregiving needs, whether it's checking in on neighbors or senior parents or have small children at home. And in order to do all those things and do the full work day, we're shifting into a 24/7 work culture, and we don't want that to happen. When it comes to internally communicating stuff, we're not really sure who's responsible. How much is too much email? What's the right way to do it? Is everybody on Slack? Is that too much to ask that everyone adopt something like Slack quickly? And how do we prevent too much information and too many check-ins so that people can't actually get their work done? And then finally, I'd love to hear from others if they have stuff to share on how you're taking care of your staff's mental health needs. This is something we're trying to take really seriously, but we don't have all the answers to just yet. So that concludes my presentation. I am going to turn it right over to Rick Guerrero at Houston-Galveston, and then I think we're going to each introduce each subsequent presenter and take questions at the end, as Anna mentioned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that and that very, very informative and thorough presentation. My name is Rick Guerrero. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Relations with the Houston-Galveston Area Council. We are a 13-county region with nearly 7 million people. We have a 250 to 260 member staff at the Houston-Galveston Area Council. And one of the things that we would love to share with you all is a little about our internal communications with our staff, how we're conducting that. And Eli, you can put my first slide up if you'd like. That's where I am, and that's where I'm calling from. And we are. One of the first things as we began to kind of plan out the different phases for moving into a potentially full remote work environment was having a phased approach under the leadership of Chuck Wemple, our executive director. He began developing different phases. The first phase kind of included individuals that may be in that high risk category. And individuals that may have been impacted by school closures or school district closures. Here in Texas, and particularly in the county that we're in, Harris County, there were, in some cases, the number of cases of COVID-19 varied from county to county. And so those school district decisions were independent of one another. And we wanted to make sure that individuals that needed to be home to potentially care for a dependent or whose school had been closed, that they had an opportunity to work remotely. And we also began kind of analyzing what our equipment needs would be to have our entire staff be on a virtual private network. Who was equipped, who had a laptop available as a part of their daily workstation that they could take home, and who didn't, and who didn't have internet at home. Let's identify those individuals and find out what their equipment needs are and how we can potentially accommodate them. So you can hit the next slide if you'd like, Eli, please. Messaging. The first thing that we wanted to do, Megan Coughlin, who's our Director of Communications, she developed some fantastic language. If you notice, this is from our HGAC website. It's a screenshot that individuals will see when they go to h-gac.com. You'll notice the absence of any type of alarming language from this statement. We wanted to make sure that it was positive, that it was empathetic, and we took the same approach with the language that we used on our intranet as well. We wanted to avoid things such as crisis and pandemic. We wanted to also make sure that we were as transparent as possible, given that we still have to conduct our business, even if we are 100% remote. We wanted to make sure that we were accessible to the public. In many cases, the public relies on our video streaming devices for a few of our governing boards. And in other cases, they rely on coming to the physical location. Our governor early on determined that there were going to be some temporary suspension of some of those physical location requirements so that the public and members of the governing bodies could participate remotely given the current situation. So you can hit the next slide, Eli. So here is our homepage. If you notice, we have upcoming events across the very first thing you see is upcoming events. And we've made sure that if a meeting is canceled or if a meeting is no longer taking place at the agency, that we don't just remove it from our website. We maintain that transparency and make sure that individuals know that it is now a webinar or it is now a teleconference and that they can easily access that information. We have many people who use public transportation to get to our meetings, and they rely on this information. So we want to make sure that this information is as accessible as possible. And Eli, you can go to the next slide. So here's an example after someone clicks on kind of a calendar notice. We have the date, time. We have a meeting this Friday. Good contact information for the individuals that will be hosting the meeting, and then a brief description as to how members of the public can participate. We have successfully conducted our board of directors meeting. We have a 36-member board of elected officials. We met last Tuesday, and we did it over the phone. We did have 3 members that showed up at our offices. This was before we went 100% remote, but we had a lot of participation in this, and we were able to take action on some critical items that would allow us to continue operations in the event we weren't able to meet again. We had, at first, obviously, there was kind of an education to all members. We had members that had different levels of tech comfort and reminding them that they needed to mute their phone so we didn't hear their dog barking in the background, and also assigning a moderator, someone who can keep track of the roll call, ensuring that we did meet those quorum requirements, which we still do have, and also ensuring that everyone, that we capture any nay votes, and it keeps things moving along. Now, this could be your presiding officer also, and that'll depend on how you want to handle it. But I also made sure to communicate to all of our staff those temporary restrictions that had been lifted, the suspension of some of those Open Meetings Act rules that would allow them to be able to meet with their governing body, because there was otherwise, you have to speak with one voice, so to make sure that everybody is on the same page. You can go ahead, Eli. So here's our intranet page. This is the first thing that individuals may see. So typically we will have, HGAC family picnic, sign up kind of thing here on the banner. But instead, we wanted to make sure that that our staff knew where to access any information while they were working remotely. So this is our intranet page. So as soon as they open up their Internet Explorer, they will automatically be brought to this page here. In addition to those announcements with specific COVID-19 information, they can access agency contacts. So if they're VPNing, they have contacts, they can access a directory of other staff that they may need to contact. Board materials. I mean, if we're still conducting business remotely, they need to know where they can access previous board information and also where they can put future board information. Emergency preparedness, and also updating some of their employee data during this time. You can go to the next slide, Eli. Issue track, that's where our staff can go if they have a technical problem, and you can go to the last one. They can go and register go back one. There we go. And where they can fill out their timesheets. This is something that's very, very important. We want to be able to process accounting as quickly and as efficiently as we can. So we want to make sure that all this information is accessible to them, and they can do this through the intranet page if they log into their virtual private network. Next slide, please. So again, here is the information regarding the COVID-19 preparation for our staff. This is the messaging that we used. We also wanted to make sure that they have the right contact information in case they had any technical issues as they move to more of a remote work environment. We also have some tools that we allowed for them for teleworking that will help with productivity, help managers track productivity. We ask many of the employees to kind of track some of the things and tasks that they're working on a daily basis. It helps keep them focused, and it keeps managers, gives them a repository to be able to kind of track what sort of progress their employees are making if they don't necessarily connect with them on a daily basis. Should we ever have a granting agency ask us for any information, we also have that information available as well. The staff extension numbers are on here, personal staff numbers, and we also, our executive director implemented some staff yesterday at a general staff meeting, which we had 100% remotely, to submit some telecommuting photos to have a little fun and lighten the mood a little bit. And I think it gives folks kind of an opportunity to share photos of their dogs, photos of them having a high tea with their kids in the backyard, and it certainly helps them through this challenging time. Next slide. And here's some other helpful links. So one of the things that we also wanted to make sure that we did was we wanted to not necessarily communicate every single update that came from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. We wanted to make sure that individuals who had questions would be able to access the latest information from their website. So we did include some links here, information for travel. At that time, when we first instituted this page, there were people that were still traveling. We were in the midst of spring break here, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed those questions or people had access to the latest information. And we also included a repository for memos from our executive director on the different remote work phases. Consistency with the memos was key here. We wanted to make sure that the message didn't come across in just an email, that it was serious, and that it came from the desk of our executive director. So a memorandum from him kept that message very consistent, kept it very serious, and then we emailed it out to everyone with his signature on it, so they had it. There is a copy, a sample of one on NARC's website, on their resource page for this, and it's accessible to you if you need it. And we also included some information on some Open Meetings Act guidance here, and some information on some helpful documents on troubleshooting items yourself through the virtual private network also. I think that's my last slide. So I really appreciate the time that you all are spending here on this. Oh, before I forget, we actually hosted, many of you, some of you may have known, but we did host a webinar for our local governments, which helped us show them that we are here for them and that they can lean on us for resources. We helped them with telework information on how to get their staff teleworking, tools that they can use for meeting virtually, free resources for hard drive space, and also Open Meetings Act compliance. It was well received. We had a great turnout, and it was very, very timely. And we continue to get questions about that. So I welcome you all to see that recording on our HGAC website if you'd like, as well as the slides that we use to present. But everybody came together, our IT team, our communications team, and we've been monitoring this with our state entities and with our counties. And we're going to be moving in the direction of also contacting all of our board members who may be in varying states, in varying states of alert and with varying numbers of cases in their counties. But we are noticing that an increase in inquiries and assistance that they're going to be needing. And so making sure that they know that we're available is going to be very important. That's all I have. And if you have any questions, please let Eli know. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Rick. And now I'd like to introduce our second presenter, Miguel Seguro of Alamo Area Council of Governments. Miguel?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you to everybody that was involved, first of all, in coordinating this webinar. I was personally super excited to hear that this was going to happen, and I think it's really important for us to have this sort of space and resource, not just as communications and PR professionals, but as communications and PR professionals within an organization as unique and complex as a council of governments or regional planning commission. So it's a great place for us to share these best practices, to talk with other people that understand some of our pain points, our struggles, that understand the lingo, and if nothing else, to realize that we're kind of all going through all this together. We're all flying by the seat of our pants. There's not that many people that can say that, one, they've gone through a crisis of this stature, let alone navigated through the crisis communications piece in a crisis for an organization like the ones that we work in. So thank you guys again. For my presentation today, I really just wanted to outline some of the things that we've been doing, some action items and steps that we've done, and also some of the pitfalls that we can hopefully avoid. And from what I've listened so far, I think I'm just going to reiterate a lot of the things that you guys have already talked about, but I'll be sure to try to number these as we're going across, so I don't lose you guys too much. But as we first, as an organization, started to hear about, this is coming at us really fast, and restrictions for our communities and our staff are imminent, thinking worst case scenario, what do we as an external affairs department and communications team, if we shut down tomorrow, what do we need in order to survive? And if none of us can come into the building, what do we need to get done before then? So immediately, obviously, having some sort of alert on your website, something that's prominent. What Houston-Galveston had on their website is a perfect example, making sure that we are developing and creating elements for social media, that are communicating, these are the services that are considered essential. These are the things that we're going to continue to do regardless of the situation. So those folks that are riding our public transportation from the rural communities to get their dialysis appointments, you're still going to have a ride, making sure that, phone numbers, the messaging is very clear, and ensuring that I think we have that similar messaging across. So that's my first point, is making sure that you have proper alerts, both on website, on social media. I think a good tip, something that we implemented for that, is working very closely with not only our local media partners, but our state and federal elected officials. Those folks are very much in tune with their constituents. And we forwarded on those graphics that we designed to our media partners just through Facebook Messenger, to some of our elected officials, to some of our congressmen, and they received it with open arms. They started pushing it through their social media channels, and we have been getting calls, just about as much media as I've been getting. I've been getting twice as much of reporters just asking me, hey man, could I redirect this person to you? I don't know where else to go. They don't know where to turn. And that is kind of the message. Send them our way. Either we can help them directly, or we're going to connect them with the resources that they need. So point number 2 for me, or for us, was creating uniformed messaging for all across the board. This is going to include the messaging that's going to be on your website, on your social media, and it's also going to be on the email signatures for all of your staff, on their voicemail responses if they're out of office. So ensuring that it all has very, very similar language. So if you're avoiding the word office closure or closed, or if you're trying to stay positive, some of those key words, make sure that you're incorporating those across all channels, website, social media, and even the talking talking points that you're going to provide to your staff whenever they're picking up the phone and people are asking them questions. On the internal side of that, a lot of that was kind of external and what the public is going to see on our website or social media. But on the internal side is also making sure that you develop some communication for maybe your human resources folks or your executive director, even if you're ghostwriting a letter, which I did for our executive director, because it's just natural. Our staff at first started getting pretty concerned and worried, and what are we going to do? My daycare is closing, my kids are out of school until April the 8th, so making sure that we're also communicating not only to our external stakeholders, but to our internal staff, and making sure that they know exactly what the plan is, give them that peace of mind and that confidence that us as an organization are prepared for this. We have a plan and we're going to take care of all of our staff, and you guys are of our highest importance. So what can we do to, even if it's over communicate to them what we're doing, because the last thing you want is for a staff member at any level to find out that one of your policies is going into place through a press release or a social media post. So making sure you're informing them first before anything goes out to the public. And number 3 is just ensuring you guys may already have a crisis communications plan. And within that plan, you should have a crisis communication team. So for us, as things were starting to speed up, I was still in the process of creating our crisis communications plan. And it's still not done. And even though I'm getting there, the top 3 risk factors that I had for our crisis communications plan did not include a global pandemic. So I had to really reevaluate what I'm putting into it and adjust appropriately. But more than anything, it's having your crisis communications team, again, thinking worst case scenario. If we all shut down, if nobody could come into the building tomorrow, I need to make sure that our executive director, our director of operations, our general counsel, and myself all have our work emails, personal emails, work cell phones, personal cell phones. I need to make sure that all of those folks, if anything happens to me, they have access to use Civic Plus to update the alerts, to make sure to get out those newsletters. I need to make sure that they have admin access to our Facebook channels, our LinkedIn, we use Meltwater for media monitoring. I need to make sure that those folks are also getting those alerts and staying in tune to everything that I'm doing. And I think that's a big piece of it, because sometimes you may think you have a crisis communications team, but that one individual may not know that they're part of the communications team. So making sure that they have access to all of those documents, all of those files, those passwords from a remote location, I think is paramount. And making sure that you just prepare for any possible situation. So when I was kind of crafting these scripts and saying, hey, these are the alerts that we're going to put on our website, and these are the alerts that we're going to put on our email signatures, I wanted to stay 2 steps in advance. So from here, if things go further south, we can take a hard left or we could take a hard right. So what are the messaging, or what's the messaging that I want for any one of those situations, and make sure that I have approval, not just from my boss, from our executive director. And she gave us kind of the okay. So I don't have to start scrambling and coming up with a message once we go left or we go right, and I need to go through the proper approvals. I want to make sure I have those ready to go, and I'm ready to implement those in a moment's notice, regardless of the situation that happens. So that's kind of, again, all happened before we left the office. Now that we're telecommuting, now that things are starting to continue to develop and we're getting updates on an hourly basis, again, number 1, making sure that everything that you've published so far on your website, on your social media, is still relevant. Making sure that all the messaging you provided to your internal staff is still relevant, making sure that none of those things have changed. If you're asking folks to give you 24 hours and now you realize that you've been slammed and folks aren't having internet at home, maybe you need 48 hours to return the message, and making sure that that 48 hours is across the board. Ensuring that all of your messaging, especially when it comes to social media, we use a tool to schedule out in a month in advance some of the posts that we want to do on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that. Going back and reevaluating our calendar and making sure that we're not posting anything that's tone deaf. And I think that in itself, using or implementing social listening whenever we are communicating out to the public, especially during these times, is going to be very key, because it could turn very bad whenever we push out a message that wasn't intended to sound a particular way, or maybe wasn't meant for the appropriate time. So I think that's an important key to kind of pay attention to, especially when you're using social media. Number two, making sure that all of your staff is comfortable with using all of the tools that you're providing them to work remotely. I feel like it's safe to say that we mostly all work in a multi-generational staff or team. And just because I know how to run a GoToMeeting, or I know how to forward my voicemail, or whatever the case is, doesn't mean that everybody is comfortable doing so, and not taking that for granted, and just taking the time to not assume that everybody knows how to do that, and including some of those instructions so you don't have to mess with it in the future. Number three, again, just going back and preparing messaging for any potential outcomes that you have, making sure that those are approved, whether, again, it goes south or it goes north, making sure that you have the messaging that you want to get across to the public and the staff, and making sure that that is cleared by absolutely everybody. And then just evaluating, taking a step back and taking a breather and evaluating all the actions that are being taken, especially as we were kind of getting to the point where all of the surrounding communities were implementing this kind of work from home, and making sure that nobody is in their buildings. And we were still transitioning from working in office to working remotely, making sure that all of those decisions that we're making align with our values, making sure that we're being good stewards, whether it's our senior leadership, our HR, our procurement, if they're trying to restock on whatever it is, making sure that they're using the proper protocols, and making sure that if anybody ever questions those decisions that are being made, that we can easily and comfortably explain those to either the public or the media. And I think I'll close it with just a few takeaways. And I think that we're still in the thick of everything. I think that these takeaways are going to continue to accumulate. But from what I'm learning so far, as what we've been through, is one, just finding out how to document all of these things that we're doing, all of these actions that we're taking. How do I make sure that I can measure the outputs versus the outcomes? Because that's what I want to look back. When all of this is over, I want to make sure that I could have a list of, look, these are all the things that we implemented, and these are the results. And let's figure out if they worked. And if they didn't, those are going to be our opportunities, so we're better prepared for any situation in the future. And then secondly is just staying on message. Stick to your mission statement, stick to your values. We got a call from a reporter that was asking about the importance of ventilators in hospitals. And of course I said, yes, they're important, but as much as I want to answer that, and as much as I want to get our name and an extra media mention, that's not part of what our mission statement is or what we do. So I just reconnected her to the proper resource. And I think I was on a webinar earlier this morning, and I think they put it into perspective on staying on message. Is a lot of the communities now, instead of a shelter in place, including ours, are using the term stay at home, work safe, instead of shelter in place. And I think those folks hit the nail on the head and realized that shelter in place, there's a certain stigma, there's a certain correlation that comes to mind when you hear that. And they did not want to ensue panic. They did not want to ensue that type of messaging or that feeling. So they are sticking to their guns, and they're saying, stay home and work safe. And no matter how hard the reporter pressures them to kind of say what it is, I think they're doing a great job at staying on message. And I think that's something that we could all kind of learn from and take to. So again, I think we're all in this together. I hope that we could all look back on this and get out of here being better communications and PR professionals, and learn a lot from everything that we're going through. So thank you guys again for coordinating this. Thank you for the time. And I will turn it over to Elise Turner, I believe is the next presenter.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Elise Turner. I'm the communications manager at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We're the MPO that serves 9 counties in Greater Philadelphia. We have about 120 staff and 4 full-time staff in the Office of Communications and Engagement. Next slide. Two of us handle traditional communications such as PR, marketing, social media, digital communications, emails, and two people handle public engagement, Title VI, and EJ. We've been very, very busy the past few weeks, to say the least. Next slide. I'm going to start out with internal communications. You know, we kind of see this whole situation as an opportunity to be a leader in our organization and in the region, you know, to use our communication skills and the policies that we've set to serve our organization however we're needed, and also move our work forward, move our mission forward. So a couple of examples of some internal communication that we've been doing, coordinating very closely with DVRBC executive leadership. That includes our executive director, Barry Seymour, our IT department, HR, as well as our planning staff. From an operations standpoint, DVRPC is in a pretty good place. We're in pretty good shape. We have a continuity of operations plan that was just completed a couple months ago, just in time for this crisis. We're in pretty good shape with remote access. All staff have remote access and the ability to work at home. We use Google Suite. We also use Zoom for conference calling. So we're pretty set up in that way. Once this happened, we immediately started drafting a response in the event that the office would close, which it ended up doing a couple days after we drafted the response. So you know, that took a lot of coordination with the folks I just mentioned. And also we've just been asking questions to our executive director. How can we help? How can we support staff? And one big piece of that is developing guidance and training for our staff members. We've been following CDC guidelines and also local officials on the rules for in-person gatherings. We're advising staff on, you know, converting those in-person meetings that they have planned to virtual. Our department has kind of been learning Zoom and Google Hangouts to become experts over the past week, so then we can train staff. We're running webinars on how to run a virtual meeting and giving the, you know, helping our staff members who aren't as versed in that. We're also preparing facilitation tips and some guidance on, you know, if you have to move a public meeting or public workshop online, how to capture that public input in a meaningful way. We've also been running just simple test runs for staff members who are leading webinars. Often, you know, you want to test it out before you actually have to do it. So we've kind of, while our IT department is kind of more focused on the back end, the Office of Communications has been really working with staff to make sure they can keep their work going. Next slide. And external communication, like many of us, we've shifted our strategy here. We've developed a consistent response and messaging for the public and our partners that was sent via email. It was posted on our website and on social media. You can check that out on our website, dvrpc.org, or you can follow us on social media at DVRPC to see that message. Throughout all of this, we're recognizing our role as a convener. That's a big part of our mission, convening people. So we've been moving to virtual meetings where all of our meetings have either been postponed or moved online, at least through May 1st. And we're using that. Part of the message is, you know, our regional leaders are continuing to coordinate on transportation projects. So during this crisis, during this trying time, we are still coordinating. We're still working together to move these important projects forward. For example, our board meeting was held this morning over Zoom, and that's how we promoted it. You know, that it's all virtual, it's open to everyone. We're continuing to coordinate. We're also continuing to share our online resources, especially our data. You know, we're asking ourselves, what information and data do we have at DVRPC that's especially relevant right now? We do a lot of bicycle counts, pedestrian counts on trails. We do vehicle counts on local roads. So all of that data, I think people are craving that right now. That's something we've been sharing. Another big piece, another focus of the past week has been media requests. We've had a lot of requests from reporters in the last week. I think I've set up about 7 different interviews in the past 4 days on things like what are the impacts, long-term impacts on public transit of this crisis? How often are people using our trails? Because some of our trails are showing like a 400% increase in usage, and along with that goes sharing the safety message of staying at least 6 feet apart. So just pushing out that data, setting up interviews. A lot of our local media see us as a credible resource because we're backed by data and research, and I think people are really craving that right now. Yeah, they're really craving that right now. And so yeah, a big piece of it has been just being super responsive to those media requests. Something else we're doing is, once we set up the interview with our staff members, is doing some quick virtual media training for those people, just to remind them of certain messages they need to convey, things like that. So just to stay consistent. Yeah, if anyone's interested in seeing any of our messaging or any of our articles that we were quoted in, you can look at our social media, our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at DVRPC. That's all I have, Eli.
Thank you, Elise. Now we'll see the final presenter, Trevor Layton from Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Take it away, Trevor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Really great program so far. A lot of really good information and tips from my fellow presenters. I've already learned a lot, so thank you. I just want to briefly talk about a few things to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, share a few examples of what we've been doing. I'll just very quickly tell you a little bit about SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, on our next slide. We are a 7-county region surrounding the city of Detroit, and we've got 170 some odd members, units of local government, and we really, on a day-to-day basis, function as a real gathering place for local officials from around the region. And so as we've been working through the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really kind of been an experience in evaluating how can we continue to do that. How do we continue to provide value to our local government members and the region at large without adding to all the noise that's out there. So like I said, I'll walk through a couple examples of that, and I'll start with my next slide. We've got a public education program called One Water that we work with some partners on in the region. So we already had some messaging and several graphics and videos having to do with what individuals can do to support our water infrastructure in the region. And so one of our key messages for that is that what people refer to as flushable wipes, particularly on the packaging, wreak havoc on sewer systems. And so what we came up with was something that would be both topical and kind of important. So the idea, as you can see on the screen here, in this video is that what's worse than being stuck at home? Well, being stuck at home if you can't flush the toilet or run the dishwasher or anything else. So reminding people, especially now that not only are those so-called flushable wipes not able to go down into the plumbing, but also I've seen in a lot of other places that the disinfecting wipes that a lot of folks are using, the kind that several of us are taking with us to the grocery store, those are causing plumbing issues as well. So kind of as was mentioned earlier in the program, sticking on our mission and our message, but trying to make it relevant. So that we're also currently in production of another video. We promote the parks and trails in our region quite a bit. We actually have a web application that enables people to see all of the different parks and trails in our region and learn information about those and provide links to the park providers. And we use something called Trail Explorer, which developed as sort of like a Google Street View for our trails. So we're seeing this as an opportunity again to remind people about the parks and trails that are available. Fortunately, we are still able, despite being under a stay-at-home, stay-safe order here in Michigan, we are still able to get out to our parks and trails. So we're working on a video right now that will highlight the importance of staying healthy and active, but also delivering some key messages about social distancing. Yes, go to the park. No, don't play on the play structure. Yeah, keep your dog on a leash because the dog park is closed. Things like that. So I think that's it for this slide. And then another thing that we're doing more of now is podcasting. So we started podcasting from SEMCOG last year, and as a way to keep people connected, we see it as an opportunity right now. As I mentioned before, we're sort of a gathering place, right, for leaders throughout the region. And one of the things that we can really offer to our members at this time is the opportunity to hear from each other about how they're working through the pandemic. And so we dropped this podcast last night's conversation with one of the mayors in our region who also serves on as the president of the National Conference of Mayors. And so he's in contact with a lot of different folks and had a really good perspective that we're able to share with our members on that podcast. I just want to briefly describe that we typically use a regular kind of studio setup in our office. We have microphones and the sound mixer and everything else. And this podcast that we just dropped was recorded using iPhones and just using the Voice Memos app and then sending those files in to our producer who was able to cut them together. So this isn't a huge lift technically, much like doing all these webinars and things. It's something that it took a minute to figure out, but once we did, it worked out even a little bit better than we had hoped. So we'll move to the next slide. As I mentioned, we are doing a lot more webinars as the previous speakers have described. This is a real essential thing to be doing right now. We actually had to increase the capacity of our webinar software. We had to upgrade because the demand for these is so high right now. So it's a mix for us of trying to come up with content that fits our mission, but it also fits the moment. So this morning, we did a webinar with 4 of the chief elected officials from communities around our region, and it was basically a roundtable. How are you working with small businesses? How are you reaching out to the most vulnerable populations within your community, and things like that? And it was really it went really well. It's our most attended webinar ever. We have got another one tomorrow highlighting data that can help people to reach the vulnerable population within their communities. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. It's a much busier time the last week or so than even I anticipated coming into a situation like this. So I think that is all I want to say. I'm sure people would appreciate the time we have left for questions.
Thank you, Trevor. And yes, we're actually going to stay on a little bit longer for those of us that can, just to make up a little bit more time to answer your questions.
Yeah, so this is Amanda. I have seen a few questions come in through the chat, but I did want to just take an opportunity to remind folks how to do that as we're opening up the webinar to Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box on the right of your screen, and Eli is going to read and direct those questions to our presenters. So I had actually asked a couple of things in there as Rick and Miguel were talking, because I was really interested in learning more about the the intranet and also sort of the tracking through SharePoint. So those are just some things that had jumped out at me, but I definitely encourage you to put your questions in that chat box on the bottom right, and then Eli, maybe if you can share anything that comes in.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I wanted to hop on and say that we can share any of the materials that presenters talked about during their presentations in the follow-up email to this webinar. So I'll try to make sure that we have links to anything that anyone talked about so you can see all of that.
Great.
And I see, yeah, we just had another person type in, Miguel, can you share some of the challenges of organizing a crisis communications team and developing a plan during this time? Okay, that's a great question. At first I thought you were just asking if you could share that plan, but yeah, that's a great one, Miguel.
Yeah, definitely. I think in developing the team itself, it's just a matter of putting pen to paper and just making sure that the decision makers that you need to pull the trigger on something, regardless of how drastic it is, you have those. In my case, and I sent the crisis communications plan that includes the team on there, so you guys can see. But it's just a cutout of a spreadsheet. It's just a table, and it has our executive director, in our case, our senior director of operations, our general counsel, and our HR director. And with those folks, I need to just go back, make sure that I have all of their personal contact info in case I can't reach them. I think the tough part with that is making sure that all of them, finding the time to make sure that they're comfortable using the admin side of our website, making sure that they're comfortable using Facebook and social media from an admin side, and just being able to do that before a crisis hits. In our case, like I said, fortunately, I had been preparing this crisis communications plan and did that piece because that was the biggest thing for me way before all of this had started. So I was fortunate that I already had all of that in place. And when it comes to developing the plan itself, there's just so many different options. I think at first it's identifying the first 3 top risks that your organization can see. And I think majority of the time, you might think of like, hey, well, there was a leader that was doing things that don't mirror our values. That's, the typical statement that you put out when you find out that somebody's like embezzling or whatever the case is. But those are tough conversations that I had to put on paper and present to our executive director and say, look, I need you to approve this messaging in case you're caught embezzling or doing something you're not supposed to, and they're carrying you away, and I need to get this message to somebody else. So it's a little bit tough to, you're kind of seeing my boss tell me to stop being so negative all the time, and I told her, I said, look, especially during these times, this is my job and this is what I need to do. So just being comfortable to making sure that you're preparing for the absolute worst, taking those things down and making sure that you're prepared to speak to those publicly and to your internal staff. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Miguel. We had a couple questions come in that were pretty similar here, so I'll read them both out. Is there any advice on how to reach out to conduct public outreach to disadvantaged populations who may not have full access to internet? That was the first one. The second was, how are you reaching out to those smaller communities that might not have modern conveniences, i.e. internet?
Since I'm already on mute, I'll go ahead and kick it off, but I'm more than happy to see what other folks have to say. But that's a great question. It's something that we're still working on right now and figuring out. Look, some of the folks that we need to talk to, yeah, sure, we could just go to a television station who will give us, a 3-minute segment. But some of the folks that need to hear this don't have a television at home or may not have Wi-Fi. So it is a bit tough. I think I've been laying down the framework to build those relationships with, for example, the Archdiocese here in San Antonio. I've developed a good relationship with some of their outreach folks and introducing some of the services that we have. So thinking a little bit outside the box. It's not everybody, social media is great, especially in our community. We're predominantly Hispanic, and studies show that Hispanics are very early adopters of technology. So we realize that, and we take advantage of that. So social media is huge, especially when it comes to Facebook. Radio is something that they all listen to as well. So making sure you're in tune with your community and just thinking outside the box, and consider, visiting, the Rotary Club members. This isn't a good time to go, but if you were kind of putting that legwork before, Rotary Club members aren't going to need your services, but they work with those people that do. So if you're connected to a Rotary district leadership level, that they can push out a message to the 60 plus clubs in your district, like it is the case here. Just kind of thinking outside the box. Who are the folks that are closely connected and communicating with some of those underserved communities? And like I said, it might be your elected officials, your congressmen. Those folks get a lot of calls all the time about concerns, making sure that they are great advocates for your organization.
I'll piggyback off of that. Oh, sorry. This is Rick.
Go ahead.
I'll piggyback off of that. I think what Miguel said was absolutely true. A lot of we want to make sure that the messaging comes from trusted sources, and particularly on a strong county leadership, particularly here in Texas. We rely on our county judges and commissioners to be able to communicate with their constituents, as those are the trusted sources at the local level. So making sure they have the information, but also, even though we're 100% remote, we want to make sure that the service and the communication remains consistent throughout. So if we used to get a newsletter out to thousands of individuals before this, we're going to continue doing it while it's happening. If we posted our meetings on our website for those that were interested in transportation-related policy discussions or open meetings, that information is also going to be on our website if that's what they relied on. Just kind of anecdotally, last year we received a phone call from a citizen who took 3 buses to get to one of our meetings that was still on the website but hadn't been canceled by a staff member, and it was overlooked. And we got an earful from her, and rightfully so. And it definitely reinforced the importance of making sure that our website is up to date and that the community is aware of what we're doing and that we're as transparent as possible. Our Transportation Policy Council meeting that is live streamed over the internet every week, we are going to make sure that that is also streamed via phone, so that anybody who's at home who would typically listen to that is able to listen to that. We also have been reaching out to some of our members of the media, our contacts who would normally maybe post something about the meeting after it, letting them know that we're also going to be meeting teleconference. There has been a lot of several news stories that I have seen here in our region where they're talking about the continuity of operations, and they even start listing some of the meetings that are still going on. And so we're hoping that that message gets passed down to our Latino community, our Spanish-speaking community, and our Asian community as well. So making sure that that message gets out, that it's consistent and as widespread as it would typically be, is the best thing we can do at this point.
So I just wanted to add one more thing that we heard on the webinar that SEMCOG did this morning that I mentioned. A few of the communities in our region have already started doing something pretty neat, which is they are taking some of their non-essential categorized staff who are able to work from home, and they actually have telephone lists of all the seniors living in their communities. And so they've assigned staff with the aid of a call form, basically a script, so everyone's on the same message, where they are calling each senior that lives in the community just to ask, how are you doing? Is there anything that you need? Is there anything that we can provide? And the folks who were on that webinar were very interested in learning how that was being done and getting access to that form. So that's something that is taking hold a little bit here.
Thanks, Trevor. All right, we're now past the top of the hour, so we're gonna have to wrap up things pretty quickly here, but thanks to all of you who stuck along with us. One final question, and this sounds like a kind of tricky one, is does anyone have pointers on fielding media requests during a virtual public meeting? Elise, I think you might have some ideas there.
Yeah, I would think, I'm thinking on the fly here. I would probably have the media person submit a comment the same way as the public is, and maybe have them, contact you offline or contact you via like cell phone or something so you can answer the question. Unless it's a question in the moment, um, I would think just asking the question just like anyone else would submit a public comment and answer it in the moment if you can. And if you can't answer in that moment, just be honest. That's all you can really do is say, we don't have the answer to that question right now, but we're working on it. Hope that helps.
This is Rick. Our laws here do not necessarily allow us to engage with public commenters, particularly if it's regarding an item that's on the agenda. So we typically ask if there are going to be members of the media or members of the public that they keep their questions, that they keep their comments to about 3 minutes, and anything that requires further study and consideration to be emailed to a specific person. Maybe that's the executive director or the chairman of the board, but we certainly don't want to be addressing those at that moment on the fly, especially if it's over the phone.
Thanks, Rick. All right, I think we're gonna have to wrap up questions now. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everything. But as I said earlier, we'll be sharing those resources, and if any questions come to you later, feel free to send them in to us, and I can route those to the presenters.
Thanks, Eli.
On behalf of Leslie Wallach and NARC staff, thank you, Rick, Miguel, Elise, and Trevor for your presentations, and thank you all attendees for joining us and asking thoughtful questions. As part of NARC's effort to help you address the COVID-19 pandemic in your regions, NARC will continue to schedule webinars and conference calls over the next weeks. Please reach out to NARC staff to share topics that you feel NARC should cover. If you need additional information about this webinar or COVID-19, please reach out to Eli Spang at eli.spang, that's S-P-A-N-G, @narc.org. Thanks again for being a part of this webinar, and stay safe.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Great job.